Today's video will have a large range of spooky tales. From getting trapped in a blizzard with things not consisting of the ordinary, to a nightmare that never seems to end, and even a story about a caregiver who has bit off more than she could chew. These stories will definitely have you looking over your shoulder. As always, a huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. The other day I went to a basketball game to perform as part of the school pep band. All went well enough, aside from a text from my mom around the middle of the game, letting me know to be careful on the way home, as we were getting some snow. After the game finished, I stuck around in the band room for about 10 minutes more. Once a friend and I ended our conversation about the musicians of Bremen, I set out to get back home. I saw the white flakes falling from the sky through the window of the room. It wasn't that bad. I figured I'd do fine driving home. I was a first-year driver, and I had never actually driven in falling snow, although I'd had to face the obstacles of driving in leftover snow before. Contrary to my own belief, I was not ready for what I had to face that night. I made it through town just fine, but I still had to make it to my neighborhood about 2 miles out. The highway was clear enough, and as I took the turn to the road I knew all too well, the hill to my small town, I saw all the snow that had piled up there. I wasn't sure how much was actually there, and I'm still not, but I was confident nevertheless. I fishtailed all throughout the first part, having to steady the car often, but I was doing fine. But as I started the slight turn along the road, I began to slide off. I pumped the brakes quickly, but to no avail. All I could do was try and turn the wheel to stop myself from rolling over. That plan worked, at the least. I watched helplessly as my car accelerated down the hill, the speedometer rising swiftly, while I barreled through the snow. That's when I saw the trees up ahead. I lifted my foot off the brake and began pumping it again, which once again proved ineffective. I know I slammed into the tree, but I couldn't see it for myself through my tightly closed eyelids. I awoke with my face in the airbag, which had luckily gone off, my glasses shoved off my face. I lifted my head and searched for them, finding them a few minutes later in the back row of seats. I shoved them on and flicked on the interior lights. I saw the smoke pouring from the hood, a gray contrast against the moonlight. I pulled up my phone to call my mother or father, but noticed I had no bars, and my data wasn't available either. I would have to get out and find a signal. I opened the door and stumbled out of the car, my legs tired. I checked my phone to see how long I had been out. It was 12:32 a.m. I had been out for nearly 2 hours. I wondered why nobody had found me yet. I couldn't hear anything in the distance, not the cars on the highway, which shouldn't have been too far away, and nothing coming from the woods. I marched away from where my car had crashed, toward the hill I came down, but there was no hill. Instead, what surrounded me was a sea of white snow and the naked trees. I turned and did a complete circle. It was all the same in every direction. No hill to be seen and no road. Wide-eyed, I stumbled into my car and slid on the gloves I had in the passenger seat. I was going to need some warmth for what I was about to do. I got back out of the car, leaving all the lights on. The car was totaled anyway, and set out on the worst plan I ever had in my entire life. I picked a direction and walked. I looked at my phone as I started my journey. 12:34. I started off, using my phone as a flashlight. Even if the moonlight combined with the snow gave good visibility, I didn't want to take my chances with tripping into the cold snow. It was 12:57 when I saw my car again. I must have gotten turned around. I climbed atop my car to use it as a vantage point, and checked the footprints. The only footprints were the most recent ones coming into the area. I chalked it up to the falling snow covering them all. I got back into the car, took off my gloves, and rubbed my hands together, until I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I stopped immediately, freezing in place. My eyes moved over to the figure, and followed it. It was male, but it looked familiar. I examined it, looked at it closely, and realized it was me. I could slightly make out facial features. What was presumably my face was covered in black patches, and I looked emotionless. What was more disturbing than the face was that I was seemingly missing an arm. The sleeve of my jacket flopped around uselessly. I dashed into the back of my car from the inside, and laid down on the floor. I was breathing deeply at this point, trying to regain control of my thoughts. I stared out the window, watching for anything moving aside from the falling snow. It was 1:42 before I saw anything. It was another one of me, shambling toward the driver door, which I had locked with the rest. It pulled at the handle, which didn't budge, partly due to it freezing over in the cold, and mostly to it being locked. That's when it started weakly banging on the window, until its last arm fell off, and the thing fell into the snow. That was the point I started quietly sobbing. I was pretty desensitized to emotion, but seeing what looked like myself dying was too much. After what seemed to be hours, I dozed off. I woke up to the shattering of glass and the bright daylight, and yelled at the sound. Paranoid it was the things from the night before. It was the sheriff, breaking the window to unlock the doors. I was still in the back seat. I've never had past mental issues, but what happened was presumed by the doctors to be the work of the impact into the tree. It's been nearly 3 days since these events, and I'm still shaken. I have no idea what happened that night, or how what looked like myself could have died. The day this all started, from what I remember, started like any other day. I woke up, stretched my tired limbs, and made my way to the small kitchen to start some coffee. I then make my way to the predefined section of the couch to stare mindlessly at my cell phone as my coffee brews. As I scroll through my social media feeds, I could feel the sleep start to build up in my strained eyes. I begin to smell the aroma of fresh coffee fill the room as it spats into the pot. The smell lifts my head, ever so slightly, but my eyes remain attached, as if with an invisible tether, to the bright and irritating glow of my phone. I lift my hand up to pick at the sleep that is building up in my eyes. Ah, that sweet sleep. What can I say? It's the little things. As I pull my hand away, I noticed a blue and purple discoloration on my forearm, just below my wrist. A bruise. I cannot for the life of me remember when or how this happened. Baffled by this, I drop my hand and try to wake up my mind to remember. The thoughts slip as I hear the drone of coffee machine come to a stop. I groggily stand up to grab myself a cup of coffee. As I'm walking towards the cupboard to grab a coffee cup, I get a brief memory of something. The pieces were slowly coming together. As the broken memory builds up in my head like a complicated puzzle, I continue my routine and pour myself a cup of coffee. An uneasiness begins to loom over me. The memory isn't something that happened. It was of a dream I had last night. No, not a dream. A nightmare. I close my eyes and let the nightmare pan out in my head. In my nightmare, I remember sitting on my bed, watching Netflix on the small TV that sits on my dresser. It doesn't look like any recognizable show that I know of. A random mix-up of all the shows I'm currently watching. I reach over to grab the remote off my bedside table to turn it off, as well as the bedside lamp. I lazily flop down onto my left side, facing the edge of my bed, hugging my pillow. I'm uneasy and nervous, but I don't know why. I let out a deep sigh and attempt to close my eyes. As soon as I close them, I feel a tug on my pillow. In a split second, my eyes are wide open again, only to find a hand wrapping itself against my forearm. It yanks me off the bed like I'm a rag doll and throws me under my bed. I'm on my back, breathing heavy. It's dark, but I can hear a dull buzz. It sounds like the buzz of a light bulb, but the light is not on. I hear something else, closer. It's at my feet, shuffling around. It's then that I realize I can't move. I'm just there. I can feel it start working its way up to me now, crawling over my lifeless body. Fuck. Why can't I move? I try to scream, but nothing comes out. All I can hear is my heart beating against my chest. I feel the thing slithering its way up, between the bottom of the bed and my body. I move my eyes towards it, but all I can see is a black mass. All I can do is lay there and watch as it moves up to my face. I try to scream again, but it's a failed attempt. I can see it now. Holy shit, I can see it. The world goes quiet as pure horror flows through me from my head to toes. At that moment, I jolt awake, hand on my chest, sweat dripping down my entire body and attempting to catch my breath. At some point, I must have fallen back asleep, and the memory wiped from my mind. It's funny what the mind dispels. I open my eyes now, a bit shocked since I haven't had a nightmare like that since I was a kid. And to forget a nightmare as terrifying as that, as easily as I did. I lift my arm up to examine my bruise again. Is that where I got this? I must have banged it on the end table coming out of the dream. I pay no mind and continue with my regular routine, and pour myself a coffee. I sit back down to my regular spot on the couch, this time ignoring the invisible tether, urging me to pick up my phone. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I hear a faint sound behind me that makes my ear twitch in an attempt to focus on it. I instinctively pull my coffee cup closer to my chest, as I tilt my head slightly to tune in on the sound. The sound stops as soon as I try to focus. I get an uneasy feeling but attempt to shake it off by giving in to the tether on my phone. My ear focuses behind me again. The faint sound was a bit louder this time, and more defined. It crept into my eardrums with increasing familiarity. It sounded like it was coming from my bathroom. No, bedroom. I set my cup down and stood up, staring at the little hallway that leads to my room. The sound stops. By this time, I now realize the sound is scratching. Fuck this. I walk towards the hall and go look into my room. I open my door and turn on the lights. I can hear the buzz of the light bulb. I tilt my head to focus in on the other sound. It's for sure coming from here. My heart sinks in my chest as the memory of my nightmare comes flooding into my head. It was just a dream. Unconsciously, I bring my bruised arm up to my chest as I let out a nervous giggle. As I turn around to continue my regular routine, my ears focus behind me again. I'm suddenly filled with anxiety. The scratching is louder now. I turn around and stare at the mess I call a bed. The scratching. It's coming from under it. As soon as I finish that thought, the light switch clicks behind me and the buzzing light bulb goes silent, and my room is dark. I can feel the panic in my chest rising. As fast as I can, I turn around and turn the light back on. I turn to my bed, hand still on the switch. I almost forget to breathe when I see it. Behind the headboard, there's a large black mass. I just stare at it. I'm not taking my eyes off it. I can't even blink. My eyes are watering up as I'm confronted with this thing. I try to scream, but nothing comes out. I don't think I can even move. I attempt again to move something, anything. My head gives so I am able to look down. It takes me a second to realize there is an arm coming out from underneath my bed. Another second to realize the hand was starting to wrap around my ankle. Within another, I was pulled under my bed to the darkness again. As fast as it happened, I wake up again, this time in a pool of sweat. I gasp for air and spring up to run towards my light switch to turn it on. I'm standing there at my door trying to catch my breath. I notice that the blue light and purple mass previously on my arm has disappeared. By this time, I'm fully awake now. I'm not even going to attempt to fall back asleep. As I go to the kitchen to make some coffee, I notice there is already a full pot. A rush of emotions fill up my body as I pour out the hopefully old coffee and proceed to make a strong batch of fresh coffee. I try to ignore the anxiety and sit down on the regular corner of the couch. I pull out my phone but don't turn it on. I pull my knees up to my chest as I think about those horrific dreams. I've never felt fear quite like that before. That hair-rising, gut-wrenching, mind-fucking fear. I press my fingers against my eyes in an attempt to wake myself up. The coffee once again fills the room with that bittersweet aroma. I look down and notice something on my ankle. I lift the cuff of my pants to get a better look. I start to feel a pit in my stomach as I stare in disbelief at the large bruise wrapped around my ankle. I sit there for a while just staring at it, trying to gather the courage to stand up and get a cup of coffee. That's when my ears adjust themselves to a slight sound, coming from behind me, and the horror begins again. It has been this way for a while now. I honestly couldn't tell you how long or how many days. It's never the same. But things from the previous nightmare usually carries over to the next. I've tried everything, but eventually the dark mass pulls my paralyzed body into the darkness. It's a shot in the dark, but I'm hoping this post will carry forward and help me break out of this never-ending nightmare. That, or this post may very well be a figment of my nightmare. Here's to hoping. I'd been a caregiver for over 20 years, and I was certain nothing could ever faze me. Working with the elderly, I'd mastered the arts of nodding pleasantly through long-winded stories, changing countless diapers, and sponge-bathing bodies from the rail-thin to the obese. I'd maintained a spotless reputation with my unrivaled diligence, near obsessive cleanliness, and superior bedside manner. My professionalism aided by my ability not to get emotionally attached to my clients. One evening I received a call from a frazzled lady with a European accent who needed a caregiver for her mother as soon as possible. After a quick phone conversation, we set up an interview for the next afternoon. Although she confessed that it would most likely be an introduction to my new position, as she didn't have time to shop around, and told me I came highly recommended. Her apartment was rather modest, but neat and welcoming, and so was the lady. She was tall, her blonde hair short and sleek, and she gracefully pulled off a pantsuit. She introduced herself as Johanna. The interview went smoothly, and after a quick chat, she led me to the second of two bedrooms to introduce me to her mother, Clara. Clara was a rosy-cheeked old lady with pale, watery eyes, and skin that had enveloped a plumper figure back in the day. She smiled, her pristine dentures framed between thin, creased lips, and I smiled back as I gave her my patented greeting that offered respect and compassion, without coming off as condescending or fake. Johanna then led me out of the room, and told me that her mother had dementia and Alzheimer's, that she couldn't leave her bed without assistance, and that her English was broken, if she bothered to stray from her native Finnish. When I inquired about Clara's previous caregiver, a routine question I asked so that I may understand what approach Clara was accustomed to, Johanna frowned, agitated by a memory I had revived. She asked me if I knew a Mrs. Li Huming. When I replied in the negative, she said that Clara had been under Huming's care for 10 wonderful years, before she just up and left, locking the door and leaving Clara alone, while Johanna was away on an overnight business trip. Johanna had returned yesterday morning to find no signs of violence, theft, or foul play, but no explanation for Hu Ming's sudden departure. When Johanna's attempts to contact her proved futile, she contacted the police. The investigation was still ongoing, but they were leaning towards the possibility that Hu Ming left everything behind and fled the country, possibly due to perceived danger from her estranged husband. It was a rude shock, and Johanna was surprised that, during those 10 years, Hu Ming never came clean regarding her troubled relationship and how it might affect her responsibilities. Johanna was also offended that Hu Ming had abandoned her mother during the most inopportune moment without notification or consideration. Johanna was relieved that at least Clara wasn't affected, her Alzheimer's having erased any lingering, fond memories of her usual companion. Johanna sighed, confessing that her experience with Hu Ming had made her realize that some people aren't what they seem, no matter how well you think you know them, or how devoted they are. I offered my sympathy, all while informing her I never let my personal life affect my professional one, and that I was ready to do all that was required to make Clara's days comfortable and safe. Johanna smiled, and thanked me for my understanding, before she said that my only obligations were to care for Clara during her work hours, and to make sure she didn't miss her favorite programs. I was then given a contract to sign, and a folder with details to familiar myself with. The next day I arrived at Johanna's at 7 a.m. sharp, punctual and prepared. After sharing a coffee, she left for work and I attended to mine. Clara was nothing special, a sweet lady who smiled brightly at my cheerful chatting and soft singing despite not understanding a word. She didn't give me trouble when it came to her meals, her medications, or her attitude, and she enjoyed watching her game shows and soap operas as I flipped through the channels as per the schedule in her folder. Every now and then she would speak up, prepping her words with giggles or gasps, depending on what prompted her speech on the television. Most of the time her comments were in what I assumed was Finnish, but she also butchered pronunciations and flipped syllables in her heavily accented English. I would base my reactions on her demeanor instead of her words, as I either nodded pleasantly or double-checked to see if she needed something or was in discomfort. During a commercial for nasal strips, I was sitting in the recliner beside Clara's bed when she turned to me and worriedly uttered, "Human." I tried to hide my surprise as I asked, "I'm sorry, Clara, could you say that again?" "Human," she repeated. I gave her a sympathetic smile, although internally I was impressed by how a sliver of a memory managed to surface in her crumbling mind. "Oh no, dear. Hu Ming isn't here anymore." I put a hand to my chest, reintroducing myself. "I'm Mary." She frowned and gripped the edge of her blanket, shaking it feebly. The loose skin on her upper arms swang. "Human." "Oh, humid," I chuckled, shaking my head at my misunderstanding. "Yeah, it is quite humid today. I'll open the fan." It was the middle of summer, and an exceptionally hot and humid day. Johanna had warned me that Clara got cold easily, so I tolerated the sweat dripping down my back as I waved the folder back and forth in front of my face. Now I eagerly turned on the fan, grateful that the request came from Clara herself. The rest of the day went off without a hitch. The following 2 weeks were just as pleasant and predictable, with Clara anxiously commenting on the humidity every few days, but other than that, remaining incoherently chatty and cheerful. I also felt a sense of pride when she managed to remember me a few times, despite her deforming my name from Mary to Mirren. One Friday afternoon, a hassled Johanna was rushing about the apartment, packing while informing me that she had to urgently leave town for the weekend. She asked me if I could spend the 2 nights with Clara, promising that she'll compensate me generously for dropping this on me on such short notice. I rarely accepted the added burden of nighttime duties, but prompted by the considerable monetary incentive, I told her I didn't mind at all. After grabbing my emergency overnight bag from my car, letting my husband know the recent developments, and receiving yet another folder detailing Clara's evening routine, Johanna gave me the apartment's keys, bid us farewell, and left us to enjoy each other's company. The night was calm and uneventful, as we had our dinner together in front of the television. During a mattress commercial, Clara worriedly commented on the humidity once again. It was a relatively cooler summer evening, so I removed one of her blankets instead of opening the fan. She didn't seem pleased by this, so I covered her again and she nodded, patting my hand. Those types of indecisive requests are common in my line of work, so I just smiled and tucked her in. Once Clara's bedtime hit, she was already snoring. I turned off the television, made sure the apartment door and all the windows were locked, shut the bedroom door, pulled the curtains closed, and settled down in the recliner with a thin duvet and a good book. Although Johanna had offered me her own bedroom, I decided to sleep next to Clara, preferring to be near her in case she should need me. After an hour, I put my book down, clicked off the bedside lamp, and curled up under the duvet, sleep tugging heavily at my eyelids. I was soaring in a pleasant dream when it was rudely interrupted by a crisp breeze wafting over my face, making my hair flutter against my forehead. I shivered and sat up on the recliner, alert yet confused, and my breath froze in my lungs when I noticed a silhouette swiftly making its way around Clara's bed. It was too tall and too agile to be Clara. I flung the duvet off of me and jumped up, frantically turning on the bedside lamp as I reached for my phone. Squinting against the bright light, I saw Clara sitting up in bed, clutching her blankets tensely as she squinted back in my direction. We were alone. I wildly scanned the small, minimally furnished room. There was no conceivable place for anyone to hide. The bedroom door was still closed. I flung open the curtains. The window offering a 7th floor view was still locked. I rummaged through my overnight bag to retrieve my stun gun and locked the bedroom door, afraid that the intruder could still be in the apartment. I then dialed the police, but before I pressed the call button, I paused to look up at Clara. She had leaned back into her pillows and was observing me with her pale, watery eyes. She was confused, my behavior disruptive and sudden. I soothed her as I carefully checked her for any injuries. She was unharmed. I then took the time to thoroughly search the room for any evidence of a physical intruder. My efforts were unrewarding. Perhaps I had imagined everything. The thought that my career could be compromised by hallucinations or waking nightmares was almost as frightening as the prospect of a stealthy intruder. My agitated brooding kept my mind occupied as I tucked Clara back in, turned off the lights, and curled up on the recliner. I kept my phone and stun gun close, but it still took a while for my skin to stop crawling and my heart to settle. As I was beginning to drift off again, a sudden realization wrenched me back to consciousness. Hu Ming disappeared while Johanna was on a business trip. That meant she stayed the night. That meant she had the apartment keys. My fear multiplied as Clara's complaints replayed in my head. Maybe she wasn't commenting on the humidity after all. I jumped back up and turned on the lamp, causing Clara to emit a grunt of confusion as she rubbed her eyes against the light. I apologized for my disruption and attempted to hold a simple conversation with her, asking if it was Hu Ming who was here tonight and if she'd been sneaking in every night. Clara only offered me a sleepy frown. Not discouraged, I turned on the television and flipped through the channels, hoping to land on any scene that involved people sleeping in beds, which seemed to be her trigger. I found a sleep aid commercial and turned towards Clara expectantly, only to find her nodding off. I was frustrated and concerned, but I had nothing concrete to base my worry on. just the obscure utterances of an elderly person with dementia and Alzheimer's, and my implausible late-night incident. I checked the time before I decided to call Johanna, figuring it was still early enough for her not to worry that she'd left her mother in incapable hands. I didn't mention what happened, but I did ask Johanna if anyone had access to the apartment other than her and me. She asked me why I wanted to know, her tone laced with alarm, and I quickly explained that I just wanted to make sure in case anyone knocked on the door. I also expressed my concern regarding Hu Ming and the possibility that she may have the apartment keys. Johanna told me that no one had access, that no one was expected to drop by while she was away, and that she made sure to change the locks the very next day after Hu Ming departed. Her words were reassuring, but I found myself even more frustrated. After we hung up, I cautiously checked the entire apartment top to bottom, stun gun in hand, but I didn't find anything out of place. I sighed irritably. I didn't want there to be any real danger, but I also didn't want to believe that what I experienced was a figment of my imagination. I returned to the bedroom, locked the door, checked the window, closed the curtains, tucked Clara in, turned off the lights, and sat on the recliner, my stun gun and phone under the duvet with me. I adjusted my pillow, my eyes focused on Clara's reclining silhouette. I wanted to stay awake, certain that her snoring would keep slumber at bay, but a fragile sleep took over rather quickly, relinquishing its control over me only when I felt that crisp breeze wafted over my face again. My eyelids popped open, and the moment I saw the silhouette pass by me, I thrust my stun gun towards it without hesitation. Despite its proximity, I bafflingly didn't make contact, and I jerked my hand away in fear and confusion, my hasty recoil causing me to fall off the recliner with a resounding crash. I scrambled for my phone and dialed the police as I lunged for the lamp, stun gun in hand, my muscles tense in preparation for an attack. The lights robbed the room of shadows, and my mouth hung agape as I scanned the area. Once again, there was no intruder. The phone was pressed tightly to my ear, and I could hear the operator on the other end of the line trying to get my attention. It was only when my eyes landed on Clara, bundled under her blankets, and weeping silently as she hugged her flabby, trembling frame, that I snapped out of it. I reported a break-in, and requested immediate assistance as I searched the room, and checked if the door and window were still locked. They were. I hung up with the police and called Johanna to notify her of the most recent developments. She was shaken and said she was taking the first flight back home. I then climbed in bed next to Clara and held her tight, consoling her as we waited for the police to show up, my mind racing through improbable scenarios. The paramedics tended to Clara and me while the police took my statement and inspected the entire apartment. They dusted for fingerprints, examined every point of entry, interviewed the neighbors, and collected surveillance footage from the hallway and the lobby. I made sure to tell them to also search for hidden doorways or rooms. I remained by Clara's side until Johanna showed up early the next afternoon, which is when the police informed us that there was no evidence of a break-in, nor any secret portals or concealed chambers with access to Johanna's apartment. They not so gently suggested that I had a nightmare, but I stood my ground. I was not crazy. I felt the intruder pass by me, the breeze from their swift movements wafting over my face. I saw their ominous silhouettes circling Clara's bed. I also pointed out that experiencing the same vivid nightmare twice in a row is too big a coincidence, especially a nightmare that Clara was aware of. I explained how she had tried to warn me about a nighttime visitor multiple times, uttering "human" as she tugged at her blankets, with a fretful expression. After listening to me in exasperated amusement, the police advised me not to be taken by the words and actions of a person who wasn't mentally sound. Johanna, on the other hand, perceived my statement to be a veiled accusation and took offense, pronouncing herself an attentive and loving daughter who would have noticed an evening intruder breaking into her home and causing her mother distress. Unfortunately, Clara was not able to back me up. The incident had not left any physical marks on her, but it did leave her agitated, the rosy glow no longer brightening her cheeks. There was something strange going on, and Clara knew it. Perhaps what I presumed to be human was actually a Finnish word, or one that was lost in translation, or one that her decrepit mind had twisted, flipped, and warped into something incomprehensible. I tried to jog Clara's memory by repeating human and showing her some bed-centric commercials, but I reaped no results other than upsetting her farther. Johanna was not pleased by my conduct, my unfounded declarations, and my disruption of Clara's safe and reliable routine, and I was promptly fired. Despite it tarnishing my spotless reputation, I accepted the termination with grace, eager to leave behind the disconcerting mystery of the vanishing intruder. Although I had always made it a habit not to get involved with any of my clients and former clients, a final look at Clara's anxious eyes prompted me to give Johanna one piece of advice before I bid her and her mother farewell. Spend a night in Clara's room, or invest in a nanny cam.